Welcome to the presentation on Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, my favorite opera. This is a pretty long presentation, so I'm going to break it up into two parts. Marriage of Figaro is my favorite opera, I will confess. Mozart is my favorite opera composer. I'm not going to give you a big biography of him. I'll give you a little summary here. If you want to learn more, there's a good discussion in your book. Of course, you can always just go online and learn more. We'll come back to Mozart several times, so this is just the start. I want to focus a little bit more on the source of this opera. This is by French playwright Beaumarchais, part of a trilogy which you probably have heard of, certainly if you don't know well. The Barber of Seville is the first story in the trilogy. You might know that from Rossini's opera, which we'll study a lot later. During Mozart's day, it was very well known as a setting, an operatic setting by the composer Giovanni Paisiello, which was so popular that Mozart chose the second in the trilogy of plays for his opera, really just to take advantage of the popularity, to kind of ride on Paisiello's coattails. Now, the second play, Marriage of Figaro, was much more controversial in France. And in fact, it was banned in 1784, and I'll go into the reasons why a little bit later. But this play, all these plays, build on the character types of the Commedia dell'arte, is a point that I've made several times already. But there's an important shift where the brunt of the joke is not just a bourgeois figure, but a nobility. So that's Beaumarchais. The librettist to whom Mozart turned to transform Beaumarchais' play into an opera libretto was an Italian poet, priest, and kind of man about town, Lorenzo da Ponte. A man who led an incredibly interesting life, probably would make a good subject for an opera itself. Traveled throughout Europe. Vienna was just a stopping off point for him for those years that he collaborated with Mozart. He didn't die till 1838, and he came to the United States, helped found the Italian Studies Department at what is now Columbia University, ran a grocery store in New Jersey. Really an amazing figure. Now, one major cultural condition or idea that's a starting off point for Beaumarchais' play is this idea of the droit du seigneur, this so-called lord's right to take the virginity of the girls in his estate. It's probably not the case that this was ever official anywhere. No doubt such activities happened all the time, though. In the 18th century, enlightened writers like Voltaire focused on this idea as emblematic of the nobility's sense of privilege and superiority, and their oppressiveness of attitude toward the servant classes and everyone else outside of their class. So it makes for a good plot for a story to attack the privileges of the nobility. So Figaro, Beaumarchais' character Figaro, is incredibly important. He becomes really an important archetype. The name of a French paper, a prominent French paper, Figaro, Le Figaro, takes its name from Beaumarchais' character. And so, as I said, your typical opera buffa throughout the 18th century would have servant characters drawn from everyday life, and they would definitely make fun of characters that were more elevated in status, but they would always be a bourgeois class. They might be a dottore, that is a doctor or a lawyer, anybody with a degree, a professional degree, who's usually played by a rather obese bass. The character of Uberto from Pergolesi's La Serva Padrona is a perfect example. What's so radical about the Marriage of Figaro is that the brunt of the joke is not a bourgeois character, but a noble character, a titled character, the man who owns the estate, the count. So it truly is revolutionary. The fact that Mozart was able to get permission to set this play as an opera is indicative of the enlightened attitudes in Vienna, the court at that time. Now, Mozart and Da Ponte did soften some of the more strident statements by the character, but Figaro is still very much in conflict with his boss, and beyond that, he essentially wins the conflict. So, very important. All right, so let's look a little bit, in fact, let's look a lot at new features that we find in opera buffa, late 18th century opera buffa. So what are the musical forms available to the composer? Well, the same ones that were available to opera seria composers, the secco recitatives, the accompanied recitatives, and the arias. There's new types of pieces of music in an opera buffa. Many more ensembles, not just duets, but trios, quartets. In fact, as many principal characters as you have in the story you can put together on stage in an ensemble. The biggest one in Marriage of Figaro is a septet at the end of the Act 2 finale. In fact, Marriage of Figaro has 28 numbers. 14 of them are arias. The other 14 are ensembles. So there's a much more even balance than you get in an opera seria. And of course, the finale is another important feature. Finale is a string of numbers at a major point in the opera, either at the end or at the midpoint, just before intermission. We have a string of musical numbers without intervening recitative. These finales are really the centerpieces of opera buffa, because you get to build not only a dramatic momentum, but a musical momentum. And that is not something that you see really in opera seria at all. Opera seria really just strings of da capo arias, as I've said, and maybe a chorus at the end to sort of be kind of a capstone. But the finale is worked into the larger dramatic musical structure of the entire opera. So let's look at that structure of the entire opera. Just generically speaking of opera buffa, you have the first half, which might be just the first act. There might be only 2 acts, like in Don Giovanni, or in the Marriage of Figaro there might be 4 acts, but the opera is still basically the same length, so the first half would be the first 2 acts in that case. The first half, you basically expose the story, the main plot line, and plus some subplots. So lots of musical numbers with secco recitatives to move the story along, just like an opera seria. But we come to the end of this kind of first half where we build up to this maximum conflict, culminating in a midpoint finale. Ideally, this is where all the main plot and subplots kind of get tangled together at one tense focal point. And as I said before, you build up to that and you drop recitatives, and you have a string of numbers. In early opera buffa, this might go on for 8 to 10 minutes. Mozart is able to, in Marriage of Figaro, extend it to as long as 25 minutes. Really unprecedented. The Act 2 finale to the Marriage of Figaro is really the pinnacle of musical dramatic art. So the second half, you gradually unravel all of these tensions that you've built up to the midpoint. So all the subplots get resolved one by one. And so these several little subplots are kind of compartmentalized in various musical numbers. The sextet is a perfect example in Marriage of Figaro, the third act sextet, which resolves the Marcellina plot. But you don't resolve the major plot. That comes only in the final resolution, in the final finale. All right, so I'm not going to walk you through specifically describing details in the marriage Figaro. It's an incredibly complicated story, and you need to have read the plot synopsis so you understand all the complicated details. But just in summary, the general conflict in the marriage Figaro is not just for Figaro and Susanna to get married. If that were the case, then the opera would end at the end of Act 3, because that's when they get married. The real point is that the Count wants to have sex with Susanna. And, of course, her being married does not necessarily preclude that. So, the other subplots, the Marcellina subplot, Figaro owes her money, and she's holding that over his head. The Cherubino subplot, Cherubino is going around flirting and is a real threat in many ways to the Count, because he's in love with his wife, is a serious subplot. These come together in an incredible, miraculous tangle. It's just the Act 2 finale. We're going to go into a lot more detail in my second little lecture part of this presentation. So, Figaro's not getting married at the end of the Act 2. However, the Marcellina subplot in the third act is resolved. We'll go into some details about that as well. Susanna and Figaro get married at the end of Act 3, but that has not stopped the Count. So the opera is not over. It's not over until the final act, where the Count is basically, with crucial help from his wife, he is exposed for being the kind of lecherous skirt chaser that he is, and publicly humiliated. So that's all I'm going to say in this lecture. We'll come back to the same presentation, and I'll discuss in much more detail the Act 2 finale.